I'd like to introduce Ethan Corey from the appeal, who's going to kick off our presentation portion of this evening.
Hello, and thank you for that introduction. As was just stated, my name is Ethan Corey. I'm the Research and Projects Editor at the Appeal. And tonight I will be speaking to you all, assuming folks can see the slideshow, about Locked In, Priced Out, which was which is the first national database of prison commissary prices that my colleague Elizabeth Weil-Greenberg and I reported on for the appeal, and which was published earlier this year. So to start with, I should set the table by explaining what actually a prison commissary is, because for those of us fortunate enough to be, living outside of prison, when we want to buy something, we, have our free pick of stores. We can go to Target or Walmart or the local corner store or whatever. But prison commissaries, which are also known as canteens, are typically the only option available to people in correctional facilities, whether it's prisons or jails or whatever. And they serve sort of as the company store or the sole vendor for all consumer products or almost all consumer products, selling everything from ramen noodles, makeup, Bibles, cosmetics, toiletries, clothing, video games. In some places, it really can run the gamut depending on the state and the specific facility. But the sort of key thing is that if you're in prison, if you want something that isn't provided for free by the prison, you can't, order on Amazon. You can't go out to a store. You have to buy from a prison commissary. This means, of course, that the prices that are set in the prison commissary are the sole thing that sort of determines what your cost of living will be in prison. Which brings me to my next slide, which is why did we actually bother investigating commissary prices? And so the fact that I'm clearly emphasizing a lot that commissaries are the only place people can go to buy is part of what makes this so important. There's no free market, there's no consumer choice determining what goods cost. Prices are being set typically by either the prisons themselves or the vendors that they work with to service their commissaries. And on top of that, the market for prison commissaries nationally is fairly monopolistic. So while many states choose to operate their commissaries internally, so they're staffed entirely by incarcerated workers and use separate concessions contracts to source the various goods. Many states rely on outside contractors to do all of that for them. And far and away, the largest single contractor, Keith Commissary, which is owned by a private equity firm, HIG Capital, that also owns several other correctional services companies, including Trinity, which does prison dining services, and IC Solutions, which is a prison telecommunications company. So Keith is, I believe, currently in 18 different states running their commissary systems. And the way these commissary contracts typically work are not with the prisons paying money to the outside vendors, but rather that Keith or one of the other commissary vendors gets the sole right to operate the commissary, and in exchange gives prison officials a cut of the profits, which means that there's an incentive both for the prison officials who are signing these contracts and the outside vendors who are arranging the contracts to make as much money as possible off of incarcerated people and their loved ones. There's not a lot of great data available on how much incarcerated people and their families are spending. But from the limited data that is available, and that's coming from 4 states, and it's a few years out of date, so asterisk on it. But the limited data that is available suggests that incarcerated people spend around $1,000 a year on commissary items, which on its face might not sound like a lot, but you need to consider the fact that wages in prison are often, 50 cents, 25 cents, or less per hour, meaning that there's very little disposable income for incarcerated people. And so many are reliant on their families to send in money from outside. But their families are often not in great economic situations either, especially if the person in prison was previously, earning a wage for their family before being incarcerated. So it's something that can impose huge costs on people not very well able to bear them. So to actually get this data was probably the hardest part of this project. As you may know, the U.S. criminal legal system is highly fragmented. There's 50 separate state prison systems, plus one for the District of Columbia, and a separate federal prison system. On top of that, there are about 3,000 local jails, most of which are run by county sheriffs at the county level. So there's no central authority in charge of them. Because jails are sort of impractical as just due to how many different jails there are, we decided to focus on just prisons. And so we spent 9 months filing public records requests. And I guess I should say, when I say we, I really mean my colleague Elizabeth has filed public records requests and spent weeks following up every week with the public information officers at every state prison system in the United States. 46 ultimately responded after, in many cases, months of cajoling. And I should add that since we published in April, New York has also responded to our public records requests. We received more than 10,000 pages of records in response to our requests, which included the contracts that prison systems were signing with the commissary vendors, as well as product listings, which, depending on the prison system, there could just be one statewide, or in other states there would be, a separate list for every individual prison in the state, and in some cases, separate lists for different units within individual prisons. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. We also ran into some speed bumps along the way, including getting sued by Premier Supply Link, which is one of the smaller competitors to Keith Commissary. They sued in response to our public records request to Mississippi, arguing that their contract was a trade secret under state law. And so we ultimately were able to resolve the suit with the help of a pro bono attorney. And we got the commissary list, so we got the prices of the goods. We did not get their contract. So who knows what was in there? That's such a trade secret, but we did not get to find out because we don't have that kind of legal pull, I guess. But as I said, once we actually got the data, we had thousands of pages, even just accounting for the lists themselves, that we had to get into a usable format, which was a lot easier said than done. Our first problem was that prisons love PDFs. Almost all the data we got was PDFs. In some cases, they were PDFs of Excel spreadsheets that had been printed out and then scanned because, I don't know, maybe they were spiteful, or maybe that's, I don't know why anyone would do that, but people sent us PDFs of printed out spreadsheets. We did get some actual spreadsheets, which made things easier, but in a lot of cases, as I said, we were dealing with PDFs. We also, as I mentioned before, we're dealing with the fact that not every state organizes its commissary system in the same way. Some states like Texas and Florida, there's one single statewide list. I think both of those states, they're actually very short and sweet lists. They're like 2 pages a piece. Other states have centralized lists, but not every product is available. So Ohio and Illinois are both examples there. Other states, it's, they have specific lists, not just at the facility level, but even at the unit level. So if you're in solitary confinement or restricted housing, your commissary options might not be the same as if you're in general population. And that may be true in many different states, but some states actually have separate lists. And so that was just one more sort of layer of complexity we had to make sense of. On top of that, we had to struggle with whether or not to include sales tax in our analysis of prices. The challenge being that not only is sales tax different in every state, states apply sales tax to different products. It's not always obvious. It's not always listed on the commissary list whether sales tax is applied. And then some states also break down sales tax at the county level. So if there's a statewide list, prisons are in multiple different counties. We weren't really sure whether or not what the sales tax would be. So we ultimately decided to exclude sales tax from our analysis, which is one limitation. A fourth challenge was the fact that there's no unified naming system for the products that are being sold in commissaries. Every state would have different names for the products they were selling. The fact that it is monopolistic did make it a little bit easier for us because at least the vendors that work with Keith do have somewhat consistent names. But the prisons that sort of do their DIY commissaries are all over the place. For example, South Carolina calls ramen noodles soup bricks, which took us a while to figure out. I never heard that term before. Maybe it's a regional term, but soup brick is apparently what they call ramen noodles in South Carolina. So that was one thing we learned from this project. So here on this slide, I have a couple screenshots of like what these lists actually look like. Up top is a screenshot of Illinois, which was one of the states that was nice enough to send us actual Excel spreadsheets. And you can see they have the, product names, item numbers, unit costs, and then also cost per case. But then below that you see Kentucky, and it's a printed out sheet from a PDF. They don't really, it's a semi-regular format for the organization, but it's the rows on green kind of all over the place, which made it difficult to do any kind of effective automatic extraction of pricing data. And then for a third example of states, we have Arkansas. All 3 of these screenshots are from different lists in Arkansas, and they are illustrating another issue we discovered, which is that the way Arkansas does prices appears to, they didn't explain it to us, so I can't give you a really good explanation of why this happened, but as you will see from this slide, the cost of ramen noodles varied drastically across units. So up top you have McPherson, which is a state prison in Arkansas, and they're charging 39 cents for chicken flavored ramen noodles, 27 cents for Texas beef. And then another prison, Wajita River, has totally different prices. And again, there's this variation across different flavors that's not really totally explained from the information we have available to us. And then at the bottom, there's yet another unit. This is Delta Regional unit, which has, again, totally different prices for ramen. So when we went to summarize the price of ramen, it became challenging for us to sort of make sense of, which of these dozen prices, and actually these are just 3 of the like 12 different prisons in Arkansas. So it really is, 3 times as many prices as you see here that we had to sort of sort through and figure out which to include in the database. So because the volume of products and the complications I just described would make doing a comprehensive database of every single product available impractical, at least impractical for an organization of our size. The appeal has only 7 full-time staff members, and Elizabeth and I were the only 2 who were working on it as reporters. We had to limit the scope of the project, which we did by choosing a representative basket of religious items, so Bibles, Qurans, yarmulkes, hijabs, etc. Food products, ramen, beans, peanut butter, milk and cheese, and so on, and toiletries, so toothpaste, deodorant, hair products, and so on. But this didn't totally solve all of our problems. We wanted to be able to compare prices for goods across states, but that raised the question of how to actually make fair comparisons across states, especially since states aren't selling identical products. So sticking with the ramen noodle example, you saw a variation for prices of ramen within states, but across states, in some prison systems, the only brand of ramen available would be Maruchan, and the only flavors available would be, Cajun shrimp, Texas beef, whatever. And then other prison systems only have miso ramen, and they, have beef, chicken, pork, whatever. And we had a very long, very extensive discussions as to whether or not it's fair to compare Maruchan Cajun shrimp ramen with Nissan beef ramen or whatever. Similar problem arises with things like toothpaste. If one state only offers Crest toothpaste and another only offers Colgate, how do we really compare those prices? Because, they both serve the same function, but they're not really identical goods. The third complication there was the fact that products come in different serving sizes. There are some states that had 3-ounce canisters of deodorant available, while other states sold deodorant in 4.5-ounce portions. And many states didn't specify the serving sizes for products at all, which we had no way of getting, because you can't just walk into a prison and see what they're selling in their store. So we didn't want to compare, the price of a jar of peanut butter with the price of like a little snack packet of peanut butter. But in some states, they only sell jars, some states they only sell snack packets. So these were all sort of the problems that we were sorting through when we were trying to put together a methodology. To solve those problems, well, we decided that we couldn't really solve them all. There's no perfect solution to address all of them. And so as a compromise, we decided to, one, include the cheapest option for every product type in the state. Even if that cheapest option was kind of obviously like, the cheapest for a reason. Cheapest products were often cheapest because they were like the travel size, tube of toothpaste, or the snack packet of peanut butter, or, the toothbrush with hard bristles that you have to dispose of after one use. So to address that, we also chose at least one widely available brand of each product from every state, so that we can contextualize the prices that incarcerated people are paying, and compare them to what readers might pay in the community. So, we included Colgate toothpaste, or Dove soap, or Degree deodorant, so that you could see what is being charged for the products that people are most likely to be buying. And then in cases where multiple major brands or varieties are available, we would choose the cheapest for the various visualizations we made for comparison. And then we have an expanded database that includes more varieties as well. So it doesn't really solve all of the problems that I outlined in the previous slide. And so the other thing we did, of course, was just try to make it as transparent as possible. So this, what you see here on the slide is almost verbatim from the methodology statement that we published with our reporting. And in the database itself, which you'll see screenshots of later, it includes all of the product information we had available for everything listed there. So what did we actually find? Well, we found very steep markups. So for example, in Georgia prisons, denture cup was marked up in some cases over 600% of what it cost the prison to purchase the denture cups. Peanut butter had a markup of more than 70%. In Missouri, ramen noodles and Tums antacids, among other products, were marked up more than 65%. Arkansas, by their prison system's official policy, all food items that are, quote, deemed healthy and over-the-counter health aids, such as reading glasses and denture adhesive, had a 40% markup, and then everything else, so junk food and clothing, books, etc., is marked up 50% over what it cost the prison to buy them. And then in Wyoming, they have a department policy of a 20% markup on luxury goods, including reading glasses and shower shoes, in their definition of luxury goods. And then a 30% markup on premium goods such as ramen and Velveeta macaroni, and then no markup on basic hygiene and religious items. This slide shows some of the variation in prices we saw across states. So this is the price of ramen in each state. And this, of course, is just a screenshot, but on the version on our website, you can hover over each state and see the actual price, along with the specific flavor and brand of ramen that we chose, which I encourage you all to look at so that you can get a sense of all the variety that we were dealing with the ramen noodles. But as you can sort of see from the legend on the chart, the price of ramen noodles varied pretty dramatically. Some states charge as little as 6 cents for ramen noodles, which is less than you would pay in a store. Other states charged a lot more. Florida, for instance, charged $1.10. And actually, while the things started becoming hyper aware of how much more likely stores were charging for ramen, and I will say that there is some variation there. Wegmans, for instance, terrible prices for ramen. They charge about $1. Most places and most retail stores in my area, at least, I live in New Jersey, charge about 30 to 33 cents for a packet of ramen. We also looked at the cost of reading glasses, which is especially important given the aging prison population. The median age of people in prison is approaching 40 and is on track to get even higher, thanks to both recent decreases in the number of new people arriving in prison, but also increases in sentence length. So people who do end up in prison stay there for longer. But as again, you can see from this chart, or these two charts, one's for the lowest price charged in each state, one's the highest price, because as noted before, states can charge different prices across facilities. But there's big variation. So Vermont was charging about $15, $16 for reading glasses, while California, on the other hand, made them free. Illinois, it doesn't look like it's on there because I guess the asterisk to this is that many states do make one pair of reading glasses available, but if you need to buy more, you have to pay. So Illinois appears to be one of those states. We also, one of the reasons we looked at religious items is that when speaking to incarcerated people, had heard that they were experiencing disparities in the prices they were paying depending on their religion. So, for example, one thing we looked at was the state of Virginia, in which the cost of a greeting card for Ramadan cost more than twice as much as the cost for a Christmas card. And the sticker price doesn't look that unusual. It's, I think, like $1.50 for the Ramadan card and like 60 some cents for the Christmas card. But when you put it in terms of the minimum wages for incarcerated workers in the state, you can see that the disparity in cost can actually be quite significant because someone would have to work more than 8 hours to afford one Ramadan greeting card versus just 3 hours for a Christmas card. We also looked at the difference between like Qurans and Bibles and found that depending on the state, Qurans tended to cost between 1.5 to 4 times as much as Bibles. This was a little tricky because there's often more variation in the like number of different types of Bibles available. So there'd be like a Catholic Bible, a King James Bible, and like one in Spanish as well. So it's a little tricky to make the comparisons, but nonetheless, we found fairly high disparities. This next slide shows sort of how we attempted to summarize and compare prices across states. So I filtered the chart or the table to just show toothpaste, and you can see that Colgate toothpaste is sort of what we settled on as the representative brand. But even making that sort of choosing Colgate didn't solve all of our problems because there's Colgate Clear, there's Colgate Advanced Whitening, there's Colgate Cavity Protection Fluoride, there's Colgate Mint Baking Soda Gel Toothpaste. And sometimes they're 4.2 ounces or 6 ounces or whatever. So these aren't really direct comparisons of identically priced objects. But as I said, we tried to present as much information as we could and just give a sense of what was being charged. And the other important thing to consider there is that because there's no competition within the prisons themselves, it's not like somebody in Alaska could be making a decision about whether to buy 4.2 ounces or 6 ounces. They're stuck with whatever size their prison system offers, and so that does provide some justification for why comparing products that aren't identical is still a fair way of distinguishing between states, because if you need toothpaste, you're sort of stuck paying the cost of whatever brand your prison system chooses to offer. I also need to show a screenshot of our more detailed database. So this shows every single product whose price we extracted. And it gives you a sense of what the variation within states could look like. So this is Ohio, and you can see not only for peanut butter are there on this screen alone at least 6 or 7 different brands. They also, even for the same brand, at different facilities will charge drastically different prices. So this table, we didn't include a facility name in the publicly released data because not every prison system distinguishes prices by facility, but for those that do, we wanted to capture that difference. But you can see, for instance, here that in one Ohio prison, they were charging $2.03 for a jar of peanut butter, and then for the same brand and size in another unit, they're charging $3.99. And so that was sort of just the kind of complexity that we were trying to boil down with our visualizations and summary data that if you really want to explore some more, you'll want to take a look at our more detailed database or download the CSVs of data that we published on our GitHub, which brings me to opportunities for further investigation. So as I said, Elizabeth and I are only 2 people. We had to leave a lot of stuff out that in an ideal world we would have included. And, we didn't have time to do all the analyses of our data that, we would love to do. So the first thing I would encourage all of you to do is to go to our GitHub, download the raw data and take a look yourselves. If you want to expand the data sets themselves, we also have a database with links to all of the lists that we received from prisons. And so that will let you either, if you just want to peruse them manually or do your own data extraction, look at the wide variety of products whose prices we did not include in the database. For instance, we did not include clothing prices at all, despite the fact that clothing is one of the largest product categories in many states. And then the last thing I would encourage you all to do is, if you're interested, look at your local jail. I guess in this case, it's the Cook County Jail, but I guess Chicagoland has several other counties surrounding the city itself. And we didn't look at jail commissary lists, but from our reporting and our research, we know that jails tend to charge even higher markups, in large part because they use the profits of commissary sales to fund a significant share of their operations. So I would encourage you all to, see if the prices that your jails are charging people are comparable to what, people have to pay outside of jail, because I suspect you'll find that they're much, much higher. So yeah, that I believe is a little over the time I was supposed to go. So I will leave it here and give you all an opportunity to ask questions.
Well, so thanks so much, Ethan, for that very interesting, informative presentation. And we have some questions from the audience for you. First question, do we know which government agency or agencies is meant to have oversight into these issues? Or is there any government agency tasked with being responsible for the issues that you talked about?
So there's no national agency responsible for that for overseeing prison commissary sales. This is in contrast to things like prison phone call prices are regulated by the FCC, but commissary sales are not, to my knowledge, monitored or regulated by any national body. States have passed their own regulations, and so some states, for instance, have limited markups, but that the enforcement of those regulations varies a lot by state, and the extent to which it's actually working is sort of an open question.
So similar question related to what you just mentioned about markup prices. Roughly speaking, did a typical markup figure emerge across states? Was there a typical amount of markup when you looked at those 40 some odd states in aggregate?
So not every state made markup data available, which made it difficult for us to come up with like a representative national figure. The ranges, what I will say though is that the ranges we found tended to be between on the low end about 15%. That's in states that have regulated markups, and in fact some states I should say have prohibited markups on certain products altogether. So basic hygiene products in several states, it's illegal to charge markups. But then on the high end, we were seeing markups of 40 or 50 or I guess the high end, as I said before, like 600%. But those were sort of more outliers. The 3-digit markups were outliers, but markups of 40 or 50% were pretty typical.
Got it. Another question from the audience. Was there any gender dimension to the analysis in terms of prices for female gendered products as such as feminine hygiene products versus quote unquote men's products like men's deodorant?
Yeah, so that's something that we wanted to do and sort of laid some of the groundwork for doing, but we're not able to really do, and we don't have the quality of data that we really wanted to be able to do it in a rigorous way. But if you look in the database, you'll see that for products that are typically sold in like a gendered fashion, so like deodorant, we did our best to include, you know, men's deodorant and women's deodorant. Feminine hygiene products are sort of a tricky one because the vast majority of states that we looked at did not list them in the commissaries. Typically, that is because they distribute them for free. They don't charge for them. But that's an area that is absolutely worth doing more reporting on. So
Thanks. So the printout information you were showing, some of them being, scans of or excuse me, printouts of a PDF. How did all that information get collated, inserted into an electronic form and get into a database?
yeah, so I mean, when we first went into this, I've done some backup projects where we had, as a PDFs or whatever, and we've been able to digitize them and extract them with code. And I had some varying versions of doing that here, but sort of quickly realized that just given how different every single state was, I would have to, and even within states, sometimes they have like 3 or 4 different formats. So I would have had to come up with, a different parser for every single list, and it just felt very overwhelming to try to do that. So we did a sort of hybrid approach where we, if the PDFs weren't already, if they didn't already have like text information in machine readable format, we OCR'd them, and then we used PDF Plumber, which is a Python library developed by Jeremy Singer-Vine that is incredibly useful for extracting data from PDFs to basically look for regular expressions that we came up with to capture different product categories. So like toothpaste, there's a regular expression that looked for like all the different brands and then variations on toothpaste and gel and whatever. And then that gave us a, sort of filtered output that then would manually go through and enter into the database. So it took quite a while to do, but we're that person doing it entirely by hand or trying to write like a separate custom parser for each list.
Well, thank you. So any idea how this system that you just described relates at a high level to how other countries do things? Do other countries have commissary systems that in any way resemble what you just talked about?
That's a really great question, and I will confess I don't know enough to give you a really detailed answer. What I can say at a very high level is that the US correctional system is, in general, much more decentralized than in other Western countries, at least. And historically, at least, many prisons in the US were expected to be self-sufficient, self-funding. And so while that, is a history that's changed a lot over time, my understanding at least is that there's a lot more pressure within the US to do things like outsource commissaries or, do this sort of DIY approach that I was talking about earlier.
And sorry, just a quick follow-up. When you mentioned about self-funding, what does that mean exactly for a prison to be self?
So, I mean, historically, in the 18th century, many prisons did not have like an independent budget. They didn't get annual appropriations from the state. They had to make their budget by, producing goods using prison labor and then selling them. And while that is no longer the case, almost every prison, the wages for guards and stuff are paid by the state. They still, it varies across state, but many places are expected to bring in a lot of revenue through things like prison labor, or if they're not directly selling the things they produce, there are many prisons where the produce they have in the dining halls was grown in fields on the prison grounds, for instance.
Interesting. Thank you. Next question. Is there a particularly egregious case that comes to your mind when you're thinking about the markups? Any surprises that come to your mind that you weren't expecting to see?
So I think the one that stuck out the most to me in terms of markups was the denture cups and also denture adhesives. Dentures are an especially important product just because, as I was saying earlier, prison populations are getting older, but the quality of dental care in prisons is often well below what one would expect outside of prison. So the proportion of the population that needs dentures and denture accessories is very high. And so the fact that they charge markups in some cases as high as 600% is really, to me, sticks out as kind of egregious because it's profiting off of a problem that is in many cases created by prison's own neglect of the dental health of the people in their care.
And I think you answered or started to answer one of the questions from the audience about what do we know about the relationship between an inability to access hygiene items or healthcare items on the one hand, and then health impacts on the other hand.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to emphasize like how bad the quality of medical care in general is in prisons. For many reasons, some of which are structural, some of which are just sort of more due to the general disdain our culture has for people in prison. But what that means is that, if you have a chronic condition, often the only way for you to treat it is to buy like a bottle of Tylenol from your prison commissary because you're not able to, if you have arthritis or whatever, you're not able to go in and see a specialist. And so you have, I guess maybe that's the opposite of what the question is asking for. This is how untreated conditions lead to people purchasing things from commissaries. But I think on the flip side, the other thing you see playing into that is with the food, actually, because food is one of the largest things people buy from commissaries in terms of volume or money spent, in large part because the quality of food offered for free in the dining halls is often inedible. If you talk to people in prison, and so people will spend hundreds of dollars a month on ramen noodles or Velveeta mac and cheese, because that's the only like tasty food available. But it also is food that is often high in sodium, and they're not selling like fresh produce or whatever in prison commissaries. So the lack of access to healthy food and sort of the dependence on like salty snack food to get enough calories to not feel hungry can lead to a lot of longer term health problems.
On the wage side of the equation, are there any states in which inmates earn what would be a minimum wage, or any states affording folks the minimum wage that someone would make outside of correctional facility?
I don't want to say this with 100% certainty because I don't have the figures in front of me, but I will say I'm 99% sure that no state offers the minimum wage for non-incarcerated people to its incarcerated workers. If you want to look into that more, I encourage you to look at the Prison Policy Initiative, which has a database of state minimum wages for incarcerated labor.
Thank you. And then one more question. I think there's time for one more. So you'd mentioned the idea of folks auditing their local jail. Any hints about how to think about auditing a local jail? How might one get started?
Sure. So the first thing that I always do with stuff like this is just ask. Or actually, first step would be to look at your local jail's website. In many cases, it might be available online. But the sort of second step is just to send them an email or give them a call and ask. And if that fails, you always have the route of sending a formal public records request, which your mileage will vary substantially depending on the state you're in, the jail you're looking at, and all of that. But there's a lot of great resources online from the Knight Foundation and other places on how to file public records requests. So I encourage you to look that up.
Well, thanks so much. I want to thank our presenter, Ethan Corey, one more time. Thanks for the interesting presentation. And Josh, if you wouldn't mind sharing the slide about next portion of our evening. The next portion of our evening is we'll have intros, announcements, and breakout groups. Please feel free to join the link on your page there to join the latter portion of our evening. And I'll just leave you all with these words. Go forth and hack.